The Florida sun beat down mercilessly on the rental car's windshield as Margaret Maggie Harper pulled into her son's driveway, the familiar weight of anticipation settling in her chest like a stone. At 68, she'd learned to temper her expectations, but Thanksgiving still held that stubborn shimmer of hope, the promise of warmth, laughter, and the kind of family closeness that seemed to exist only in her memory these days. Kyle's house stood before her like a monument to modern success. Pristine white stucco, manicured lawn, and a 3-car garage that probably cost more than the entire house she'd raised him in back in Ohio. She'd driven 12 hours straight from her own modest Florida home 2 counties over, her arthritic hands cramping around the steering wheel, but she'd made it. She was here, ready to be grandmother, mother, and whatever else her fractured family needed her to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The front door opened before she could knock, and Kyle appeared. Tall, graying at the temples, wearing the kind of casual expensive clothes that screamed, successful lawyer on his day off. His smile was the practiced one she'd grown accustomed to over the years, the one that never quite reached his eyes. "Mom, you made good time." He pecked her cheek with the efficiency of someone checking an item off a list. "How was the drive?" "Long," Maggie replied, studying his face for some trace of the boy who used to run to her arms when she came home from her second job at the diner. "But worth it to see my family." Emma appeared behind Kyle, her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail, wearing yoga pants that probably cost more than Maggie's monthly grocery budget. She'd always been beautiful in that effortless way that came with good breeding and better skincare, but there was something cold in her smile, something that made Maggie feel like an unwelcome guest rather than family. "Maggie, so good to see you," Emma said, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for social obligations. "I hope you don't mind, but we've had to make some adjustments to the sleeping arrangements." The first flutter of unease stirred in Maggie's stomach. "Adjustments?" Kyle ran a hand through his hair, not meeting her eyes. "Well, you see, Sarah has a friend staying over for the weekend, and Emma's parents decided to come down from Atlanta at the last minute. And what Kyle's trying to say," Emma interrupted with that practiced efficiency that reminded Maggie why she'd never warmed to her daughter-in-law, "is that we've set up a really comfortable space for you in the garage. It's climate-controlled, and we've put in an air mattress and everything." The words hit Maggie like a physical blow. The garage. They wanted her to sleep in the garage like some unwanted piece of furniture they couldn't quite throw away. "The garage?" she repeated, her voice flat. "It's really quite nice," Emma continued, her tone brightening as if enthusiasm could somehow make this less insulting. "Kyle cleared out all his tools, and there's even a little space heater if you get cold." Maggie looked at her son, waiting for him to say something, anything, that would indicate he saw the profound disrespect in this arrangement. But Kyle just stood there, hands in his pockets, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "I see," Maggie said finally. "And where exactly are Emma's parents sleeping?" "The master guest room," Emma replied without a trace of irony. "They have some back issues, you know, and they need the proper support." Of course they did. Maggie's own back, which had ached for the past 3 years since her fall, apparently didn't warrant the same consideration. She was 68 years old, had driven 12 hours to spend Thanksgiving with her only child, and they were putting her in the garage while Emma's parents, who had decided to come at the last minute, got the guest room. "Mom, it's really not that bad," Kyle said, finally finding his voice. "And it's just for 3 nights. Just 3 nights." As if the duration somehow lessened the humiliation. "I'm sure it'll be fine," Maggie heard herself say, though every instinct screamed at her to get back in her car and drive home. But where would that leave her? Alone in her empty house, eating turkey TV dinners and pretending it didn't matter that her son couldn't be bothered to treat her with basic dignity. The garage was, as promised, climate-controlled. Kyle had indeed cleared out his tools, stacking them neatly in one corner along with bins of Christmas decorations and boxes of Sarah's childhood things that Emma couldn't bring herself to throw away but wouldn't display either. The air mattress sat in the center of the concrete floor, like an island of false comfort, surrounded by the detritus of a life too busy for sentiment. Maggie set her suitcase down beside the mattress and tried to summon some gratitude. At least she was here. At least she'd see Sarah, her granddaughter, who at 17 still hugged her with genuine affection and asked about her stories from the old days. At least she'd have Thanksgiving dinner with her family, even if that family seemed to view her presence as somewhere between an obligation and an inconvenience. Through the thin walls, she could hear the sounds of preparation, Emma's voice directing Kyle to move furniture, Sarah's laugh mixing with the deeper voices of Emma's parents. The sounds of a family gathering that she was somehow both part of and apart from. She thought about Harold then, her husband who died when Kyle was only 12. Harold would have built her a bedroom addition with his own hands before he'd let her sleep in someone's garage. Harold had understood that family meant making room, literally and figuratively, for the people you loved. But Harold was 26 years in the ground, and Kyle had learned his lessons about family from Emma's side, where appearances mattered more than feelings and efficiency trumped sentiment every time. The air mattress squeaked as she sat down, testing its support. It would do. It would have to do. But something hard and cold settled in her chest as she listened to her family laugh and prepare for Thanksgiving in the house beyond these walls. A house she was welcome to visit, but apparently not quite welcome enough to sleep in. Dinner was a masterpiece of modern entertaining. The table was set with Emma's good china, the turkey was perfectly golden, and the conversation flowed around topics that made everyone sound successful and well-informed. Emma's parents, Richard and Patricia, were exactly what Maggie had expected, well-dressed, well-spoken, and completely unaware that their presence had displaced the grandmother of their son-in-law. "Maggie, you must be so proud of Kyle," Patricia said, her voice carrying that particular brand of Southern charm that managed to sound both sweet and condescending. "Emma tells us he just made partner." "Yes," Maggie replied, forcing a smile. "He's always been driven." "Runs in the family," Richard added, raising his wine glass. "Emma's the same way. Never met a challenge she couldn't conquer." Sarah, bless her, seemed to sense the undercurrents. "Grandma Maggie, tell us about when you were our age. You always have the best stories." Emma's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sarah, let's not monopolize the conversation." But Maggie was already speaking, her voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone who'd learned to grab attention when she could get it. "Well, when I was 17, I was working 2 jobs and trying to finish high school. Your grandfather Harold had just asked me to marry him, and I was terrified I'd mess it all up." "2 jobs?" Patricia's eyebrows rose. "How ambitious." "Necessary," Maggie corrected. "My father had left, and my mother was doing her best. But best doesn't always pay the bills." An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Emma cleared her throat and began gathering plates with unnecessary vigor. "Times were different then," Kyle said, his tone suggesting the conversation should move on. "Yes, they were," Maggie agreed. "People made room for family, no matter how inconvenient it might be." The words hung in the air like smoke from a snuffed candle. Emma's movements became more pronounced, the china clattering as she stacked plates. Kyle stared at his hands. Richard and Patricia exchanged the kind of look that couples perfect after decades of marriage. A look that said they'd stumbled into someone else's family drama. "I should help with the dishes," Maggie said, starting to rise. "No need," Emma replied quickly. "Kyle can help me. You just relax. Relax." In the garage, where she belonged, apparently. Later that evening, as the house settled into quiet and the sounds of her family's bedtime routines filtered through the walls, Maggie lay on the air mattress staring at the ceiling. Boxes loomed around her in the darkness, like monuments to lives being lived without her input or presence. She thought about the years after Harold died, when it had been just her and Kyle. She'd worked at the hardware store during the day and cleaned offices at night, coming home exhausted but always making time to help with homework, to listen to his stories about school, to be present in the way her own parents never had been. She'd sacrificed dates, vacations, new clothes, dental work, everything that might have made her life easier or more comfortable, to make sure Kyle had what he needed. And now here she was, sleeping in his garage while his in-laws enjoyed the guest room. Day, the irony wasn't lost on her. She'd raised him to be successful, to value hard work and achievement. She just hadn't realized that somewhere along the way he'd learned to value those things more than the woman who'd taught them to him. A sound from the house caught her attention, voices low and intense. She recognized Emma's tone, that particular pitch she used when she was explaining something she thought was obvious to someone she considered slow to understand. "She's being dramatic, Kyle. It's 3 nights and she's family. Family makes accommodations." "I know, but still." "But what? Your mother's lived alone for 15 years. She's independent. She doesn't need to be coddled." Independent. Was that what they called it, when you stopped expecting basic courtesy from your own child? When you accepted whatever scraps of attention and affection were thrown your way? Kyle's voice was muffled, but she caught the word uncomfortable, and Emma's sharp response, "Well, we're all uncomfortable. That's what holidays are, managing everyone's expectations and trying to keep the peace." Managing expectations. Keeping peace. As if Maggie were some difficult relative they had to endure, rather than the woman who'd given Kyle life, love, and every opportunity she could scrape together with her bare hands. Something shifted inside her chest then, something that had been building for years but had never quite crystallized until this moment. It was the feeling of being relegated to the margins of her own son's life, of being treated like a burden instead of a blessing. It was the realization that all her sacrifices, all her love, all her years of putting Kyle first, had somehow led to this, sleeping on an air mattress in a garage, while strangers enjoyed the comfort she'd been denied. The Florida humidity pressed against the garage walls like something alive, and Maggie pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heart beat steady and strong. She'd survived Harold's death, raised a son alone, built a new life for herself in Florida, and weathered every storm that had come her way. She was not the kind of woman who accepted disrespect quietly, even from her own child. Especially from her own child. As she lay there in the darkness, surrounded by the remnants of a life she'd helped build but was no longer truly part of, Margaret Harper began to plan. She didn't know exactly what she was going to do yet, but she knew with crystalline certainty that this would be the last time she slept in anyone's garage. The last time she accepted being treated as less than she was worth. The last time she let her family take her for granted. Outside, the Florida night pressed close and humid, full of possibility and change. Inside the garage, a woman who'd spent too many years making herself small began to remember what it felt like to take up space in the world. The Florida night pressed close and humid, full of possibility and change. Inside the garage, a woman who'd spent too many years making herself small began to remember what it felt like to take up space in the world. But sleep, when it finally came, brought no peace. Only restless dreams of Harold's disapproving face and memories of Kyle as a boy, promising her he'd always take care of her when she got old. Dawn crept through the garage's single window, like an unwelcome truth, harsh and unforgiving. Maggie's back screamed in protest as she rolled off the air mattress, her joints stiff from a night on what felt like concrete disguised as comfort. The sounds of morning routine filtered through the walls, Emma's coffee maker grinding, Kyle's shower running, the muffled voices of Richard and Patricia discussing their plans for the day. No one knocked on the garage door to check if she was awake. No one called out a good morning. She might as well have been invisible. Maggie dressed carefully, choosing the navy blue dress she'd bought specifically for this visit, the one that made her feel dignified and put together. If they were going to treat her like an outsider, she'd at least look like a woman who deserved better. She folded her nightgown with military precision, a habit left over from her working days when every minute counted and everything had to be in its place. The house smelled like bacon and fresh coffee when she finally emerged from her exile. Emma stood at the kitchen island, perfectly dressed in cream-colored linen, arranging fruit on a platter with the kind of attention to detail that suggested she'd rather be doing anything else. Kyle sat at the breakfast bar, already showered and dressed, his laptop open beside his plate of eggs Benedict. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking up from his screen. "Coffee's fresh." "How did you sleep?" Emma asked, her tone bright and artificial, as if sleeping in a garage were the most natural thing in the world. "Like a baby," Maggie lied, pouring herself coffee from the expensive machine that probably cost more than she spent on groceries in a month. Nothing like concrete under an air mattress to make you appreciate a good night's rest. Kyle's fingers paused over his keyboard, but he didn't look up. Emma's smile flickered for just a moment before reassembling itself. "I'm so glad you're comfortable," Emma said. "Richard and Patricia are already up and about. They've gone for a walk around the neighborhood. They're such early risers." Of course they were. And of course they'd been offered a proper bedroom where they could sleep soundly enough to wake up refreshed and ready for morning constitutionals. Maggie sipped her coffee and watched her son's profile, searching for some sign that he understood the magnitude of his disrespect. But Kyle remained focused on his screen, his jaw working as he chewed his perfectly prepared breakfast. "Big case?" Maggie asked, nodding toward the laptop. "Always," Kyle replied, finally glancing up. "You know how it is. The work never stops." She did know how it was. She'd worked multiple jobs for 15 years, coming home exhausted to help him with homework, to cook his dinner, to listen to his problems. The difference was that her work had been about survival and love, not about accumulating the kind of wealth that bought houses with guest rooms you couldn't spare for your own mother. "Sarah still sleeping?" Maggie asked. "She and her friend were up late watching movies," Emma said. "Teenagers, you know." Maggie nodded, though she wondered if Sarah's friend was sleeping in an actual bed or if she too had been relegated to some storage space. Somehow, she doubted it. "What are the plans for today?" Maggie asked, settling into one of the breakfast bar stools that seemed designed more for appearance than comfort. Kyle and Emma exchanged a look, one of those married couple communications that happened without words. It was the kind of look that said they'd already discussed this, already made decisions without consulting her. "Well," Emma began, her voice taking on that carefully modulated tone again. "Richard and Patricia want to go antiquing in Winter Park, and Kyle has some work to catch up on. On Thanksgiving weekend?" Maggie interrupted. "Big case," Kyle said again, as if that explained everything. As if success meant never being fully present for anything that wasn't billable. "And Sarah's friend's parents are picking her up around noon," Emma continued. "So Sarah will probably want to rest before dinner tonight." Maggie waited for someone to mention what she might want to do, how she might fit into these carefully laid plans. The silence stretched between them like a chasm. "I see," she said finally. "And what about me?" Another look passed between Kyle and Emma. This one carried a different energy. Exasperation, maybe, or the kind of patience you'd show a child who kept asking questions with obvious answers. "You're welcome to do whatever you'd like, of course," Emma said. "There are some lovely shops downtown, or you could relax by the pool." Welcome to do whatever she'd like. In a house where she was sleeping in the garage. Where her presence was so inconvenient that her son couldn't spare a morning to spend time with her. "How thoughtful," Maggie said, her voice carrying an edge she couldn't quite suppress. Kyle's head snapped up then, some warning bell finally penetrating his distraction. "Mom." "No, it's fine," Maggie said, standing abruptly. "I'll just figure something out. I'm good at that." She walked toward the sliding glass door that led to the backyard, needing air, needing space, needing to be anywhere but in that kitchen where her son treated her like a particularly inconvenient houseguest. Behind her, she heard Kyle's voice, low and urgent. "Emma, maybe we should." "Should what?" Emma's response was sharp, unguarded. "Rearrange our entire weekend because your mother's being difficult?" Difficult. The word hit Maggie like a slap. She was being difficult because she'd expected basic courtesy from her own child. Because she'd thought that maybe, just maybe, her son might want to spend time with the woman who'd raised him. She stepped outside into the Florida morning, the humidity wrapping around her like a wet blanket. The pool sparkled in the early sunlight, surrounded by carefully manicured landscaping that screamed professional design. Everything was perfect, beautiful, expensive, everything except the family that lived here. The sound of voices from the kitchen drifted through the open door. Kyle and Emma, their tones hushed but intense. "She's my mother, Emma. And she's being passive-aggressive. You know how she gets?" "How she gets?" She drove 12 hours to see us, and we stuck her in the garage. Because we didn't have a choice. Unless you wanted to put my parents in the garage? Maybe we could have. Could have what? Asked them to stay in a hotel? Kyle, they're 70 years old, and they have health issues. My mother's 68. Your mother is perfectly healthy and perfectly capable of understanding that sometimes accommodations have to be made. Accommodations. As if her displacement were just another item on Emma's perfectly organized checklist of holiday management. Maggie pressed her back against the stucco wall beside the door, her heart hammering with a mixture of hurt and rage she hadn't felt in years. Look, Emma continued, her voice taking on that patient tone she used when explaining obvious things to slow people. Your mother has lived alone for 15 years. She's independent. She doesn't need to be coddled like she's some fragile old lady. She's tougher than that. Tough. Yes, she was tough. She'd had to be. She'd buried her husband at 42 and raised a son alone, working jobs that left her exhausted and aching, skipping meals so Kyle could have new school clothes, postponing her own dreams so he could chase his. She'd been tough when tough was what her family needed. But apparently being tough meant you weren't entitled to basic respect. Being independent meant your needs didn't matter. Being capable meant you were expected to gracefully accept whatever scraps of consideration your family threw your way. She sacrificed a lot for me, Kyle said, his voice quieter now. And you've paid her back. You put her through college when Harold died. She put herself through college. I just helped with some expenses after I started making decent money. Exactly. You've been a good son. But that doesn't mean you owe her your guest room when other people need it more. Other people. People like Emma's parents, who had money and health insurance and probably guest rooms of their own back in Atlanta. People who mattered more than the woman who'd given Kyle everything she had. Maggie closed her eyes, feeling something fundamental shift inside her chest. She'd spent years telling herself that Kyle's distance was just the natural evolution of a mother-son relationship, that his busy life was a sign of success she should be proud of. She'd made excuses for missed calls, forgotten birthdays, and holidays where she felt more like an obligation than a guest. But this, being relegated to a garage while strangers enjoyed her rightful place, this was different. This was a declaration. A statement about her value in her son's life, about where she ranked in his hierarchy of relationships. This was tough, all right? Tough enough to recognize disrespect when it was served to her with a side of perfectly prepared eggs Benedict. Tough enough to stop accepting treatment that no mother should have to endure from the child she'd sacrificed everything to raise. I'm going for a walk, she called through the door, not waiting for a response. The neighborhood was everything Kyle and Emma probably loved about it. Quiet, expensive, perfectly maintained. Each house sat on its manicured lot like a monument to success, separated by enough space to ensure privacy and just enough landscaping to suggest taste without ostentation. It was the kind of place where problems were handled with discretion, and family drama was kept behind closed doors. Maggie walked slowly, her mind churning with fragments of memory and possibility. She thought about the house she'd left behind 2 counties away, modest but paid for, filled with furniture that meant something, and pictures that told the story of a life lived on her own terms. She thought about her neighbor Bradley, who always waved when she worked in her garden, and sometimes brought her oranges from his tree. She thought about the small freedoms of living alone, eating dinner at whatever time she chose, watching the program she wanted to watch, making decisions without consulting anyone else's preferences or schedules. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe she was independent. Maybe she was tough enough to stop pretending that being part of this family meant accepting whatever treatment they decided she deserved. A man was working in his front yard 3 houses down, and something about his careful attention to his roses reminded her of Harold. He looked up as she approached, his face creasing into the kind of smile that reached his eyes, the kind she hadn't seen from her own family in longer than she cared to remember. "Beautiful morning," he said, straightening and wiping his hands on a gardening towel. "It is," Maggie agreed, surprised by how good it felt to have someone address her directly, without agenda or obligation. "You visiting the Harpers?" he asked. "I'm Brad Matthews." Live right here. He gestured toward the house behind him. Similar to Kyle's, but somehow warmer, more lived in. Maggie Harper, Kyle's mother. Ah, the famous Maggie, Brad said, his smile widening. Kyle's mentioned you. Says you raised him on your own after his father passed. Kyle had mentioned her. To this stranger, this neighbor, Kyle had spoken about her in terms that suggested respect, even pride. The contradiction made her chest tight. I did my best, she said. Must have done something right. Kyle's a good man. Works too hard, maybe, but good heart. Good heart? When was the last time she'd seen evidence of that good heart directed her way? You live alone here? She asked, then immediately felt foolish for the personal question. But Brad didn't seem to mind. 5 years now, moved down from Michigan after my wife passed, needed a change of scenery. I'm sorry for your loss. Thank you. It's been an adjustment, but I've found that sometimes starting over in a new place helps you figure out what really matters. Starting over. The phrase resonated in ways that surprised her. At 68, was it too late for new beginnings? Too late to stop accepting less than she deserved from the people who were supposed to love her most? I should get back, she said, though the thought of returning to Kyle's house made her stomach clench. It was nice meeting you, Maggie. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving weekend. Thank you, she said, and meant it. Walking back toward Kyle's house, Maggie felt something crystallizing in her mind. Not quite a plan yet, but the beginning of an idea. She thought about her own house, sitting empty while she slept in garages. She thought about Brad's words about starting over, about figuring out what really mattered. She thought about the years she'd spent making herself smaller, quieter, more convenient for a family that couldn't be bothered to make room for her in return. By the time she reached Kyle's driveway, Maggie Harper had made a decision. She didn't know exactly what form it would take yet, but she knew with bone-deep certainty that this would be the last time she allowed herself to be treated as anything less than the woman who'd earned her place at the table through decades of love, sacrifice, and unwavering devotion. The garage door loomed before her like a symbol of everything wrong with her current life. But as she reached for the handle, Maggie wasn't thinking about sleeping on air mattresses anymore. She was thinking about change. About choices. About what it might feel like to reclaim the power she'd been giving away one compromise at a time. The breaking point, when it came, felt less like shattering and more like awakening. Like finally, after years of sleepwalking through her own life, Margaret Harper was ready to wake up. The breaking point, when it came, felt less like shattering and more like awakening. Like finally, after years of sleepwalking through her own life, Margaret Harper was ready to wake up. She stood in the garage doorway for a long moment, her hand on the cool metal handle, listening to the distant sounds of her family moving through their carefully orchestrated morning routines without her. The air mattress sat deflated in the center of the concrete floor, a deflated symbol of her diminished place in Kyle's world. But as Maggie looked at it now, she didn't see defeat. She saw clarity. For the first time in years, she knew exactly who she was and what she was worth. She pulled out her phone, a smartphone Kyle had insisted she needed, though she suspected it was more about his convenience than hers, and began searching. Real estate values in Kyle's neighborhood. Market trends in Florida. The kinds of information she'd never needed before but suddenly found fascinating. The numbers that appeared on her screen made her eyebrows rise. Kyle's house, purchased 8 years ago for $400,000, was now worth nearly $700,000. The neighborhood had appreciated significantly, driven by Florida's booming real estate market and the area's reputation for excellent schools and low crime. More interesting still were the recent sales. Houses were moving quickly, often above asking price, to buyers who paid cash and closed fast. It was a seller's market, the kind of environment where someone with the right property could have their pick of offers. Someone like her. Maggie scrolled through listings, her mind working with a precision that surprised her. Her own house, while smaller and in a less prestigious area, would still be worth a considerable sum in this market. Enough to give her options she'd never seriously considered before. enough to change the entire dynamic of her relationship with her family. Enough to make them pay attention. The sound of voices from the kitchen interrupted her research. Emma's parents had returned from their walk, their cheerful voices mixing with Kyle's deeper tones and Emma's practiced hostess responses. The sounds of a family gathering that was happening without her, as if she'd never been expected to be part of it at all. Maggie closed the real estate app and opened her contacts instead. She scrolled down to a name she hadn't called in months. Janet Morrison, her former colleague from the hardware store who'd gone into real estate after retirement. Janet was sharp, no nonsense, and had always been impressed by Maggie's ability to size up people and situations quickly. Before she could second-guess herself, Maggie pressed call. Maggie Harper, as I live and breathe. Janet's voice was warm with genuine pleasure. How are you, honey? How's that son of yours? I'm fine, Janet. Kyle's busy. The word felt bitter on her tongue. Listen, I need some information about selling my house. Your house? Maggie, you love that place. You've put so much work into it. Times change, Maggie said simply. I'm thinking it might be time for something different. There was a pause, and Maggie could practically hear Janet's real estate instincts kicking in. Well, this is definitely the market for it. Values in your area have gone up 23% in the past year alone. When are you thinking of making a move? Soon, Maggie said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. Maybe very soon. All right, honey, why don't I come by next week and we can talk about it? I can do a comparative market analysis, help you understand what you're looking at. That would be perfect. After ending the call, Maggie sat in the silence of the garage, her phone warm in her hands. She'd taken the first step towards something, though she wasn't entirely sure what yet. All she knew was that sleeping in garages was behind her, one way or another. A soft knock on the garage door startled her. Grandma Maggie. Sarah's voice, tentative and sweet, was like a lifeline thrown into dark water. Maggie opened the door to find her granddaughter standing there in pajama pants and an oversized sweatshirt, her dark hair tousled from sleep. Hi, sweetheart. I heard you were out here, Sarah said, stepping into the garage and looking around with fresh eyes. This is really where they made you sleep? The question, asked with 17-year-old directness, cut straight to the heart of things. It's fine, Maggie said automatically, then stopped herself. Actually, no. It's not fine. But it's what I've been given. Sarah's face crumpled slightly. I didn't know. Mom just said you were staying in here because it was more private. And I thought, I didn't think about what that really meant. It's not your fault, baby. But it is, kind of. I should have said something. I should have offered my room or something. Sarah sat down on one of Kyle's toolboxes, her young face serious with the weight of adult realizations. You know what's really messed up? My friend Chloe slept in my room, and I didn't even think about how weird it was that my grandmother was sleeping in the garage while some random friend got a real bed. Maggie felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Here, finally, was someone who understood the fundamental wrongness of the situation. Someone who recognized that respect wasn't something you parceled out based on convenience or social standings. You're growing up, Maggie said, starting to see things as they really are instead of how people tell you they are. Is that why you seem different this morning? Mom said you were being difficult, but you don't seem difficult. You seem, I don't know, like you've decided something. Perceptive girl. She'd inherited Harold's ability to read people, to see past surface explanations to underlying truths. Maybe I have decided something, Maggie said carefully. Sometimes you reach a point where you realize that accepting something doesn't make it acceptable. Sarah nodded as if this made perfect sense. Like when Chloe kept borrowing my clothes without asking and I finally told her to stop. I thought I was being nice by not saying anything, but really I was just teaching her that my boundaries didn't matter. Exactly like that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, granddaughter and grandmother united in their understanding of what it meant to be taken for granted by people who were supposed to care about them. What are you going to do? Sarah asked finally. I don't know yet, Maggie said honestly, but I'm done sleeping in garages. I'm done being treated like my presence is an inconvenience to be managed. rather than a gift to be appreciated. Sarah smiled then, the first genuine expression of happiness Maggie had seen since arriving. "Good. You deserve better than this. So do you, sweetheart, remember that." After Sarah left to get dressed for the day, Maggie found herself alone again with her thoughts and her phone. The conversation with her granddaughter had crystallized something important. This wasn't just about her anymore. Sarah was watching, learning what it looked like when family members accepted disrespect. What lessons was Maggie teaching by continuing to smile and make excuses for treatment that would be unacceptable in any other relationship? Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She opened her browser again, this time searching for something more specific. Real estate developers in Kyle's area. Companies that specialized in quick sales and cash transactions. The kind of businesses that could move fast when the right opportunity presented itself. One name kept appearing in the search results: Sunshine Development Group. According to their website, they specialized in acquiring properties in up-and-coming neighborhoods for renovation and resale. Their testimonials spoke of quick closings, fair prices, and minimal hassle for sellers. More interestingly, their recent projects included several houses in Kyle's immediate area. They were actively working in the neighborhood, which meant they'd be familiar with property values and market conditions. Maggie scrolled through their portfolio, noting the before and after photos of houses they'd purchased and transformed. Modest family homes became sleek, modern showcases. Dated architectural details were stripped away in favor of clean lines and neutral colors. It was impressive work, though something about the transformations made her slightly sad, as if the house's histories and personalities had been erased along with their flaws. But sadness wasn't useful right now. What was useful was the knowledge that there were buyers in Kyle's neighborhood, buyers with cash and quick timelines, buyers who might be very interested in a particular property if it became available. All's a little Ozoas and Malinal. She was still researching when her phone rang. Kyle's name appeared on the screen, and for a moment she considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity won. "Hi, honey." "Mom, where are you?" "Emma's making lunch, and we were looking for you." Looking for her. How thoughtful. "I'm in the garage, where I sleep." There was a pause, long enough for Maggie to hear the sounds of the house behind Kyle's voice. Emma calling something to her parents, the television playing in the background, the normal sounds of a family going about their day. "Look, Mom, about that. Emma feels bad about the sleeping arrangements. She wanted me to tell you that if you're uncomfortable." "I'm fine," Maggie interrupted. "Perfectly comfortable. Independent, remember? Tough enough to handle anything." Another pause. Kyle was finally picking up on the edge in her voice, the subtle shift in her usual accommodating tone. "Are you okay? You sound different." "I'm exactly the same as I've always been," Maggie said. "The question is whether you're finally paying attention." "Mom, I'll be in for lunch in a few minutes," she said, ending the call before Kyle could respond. She looked around the garage one more time, taking in the concrete floors, the exposed beams, the careful arrangement of storage that had been moved aside to make room for her air mattress. This was how her son saw her, as something to be accommodated when convenient, stored away when not needed, managed rather than honored. But garages were temporary spaces, places you kept things you weren't sure what to do with yet. And Maggie Harper was done being something people didn't know what to do with. She stood up, smoothing her navy dress and checking her reflection in the garage's small window. She looked like what she was, a woman of substance, dignity, and quiet strength, a woman who'd raised a successful son, built a life on her own terms, and deserved better than concrete floors and air mattresses. Walking toward the house, Maggie felt the weight of decisions settling around her like armor. She didn't have all the details worked out yet, but the broad strokes were becoming clear. She had assets, options, and most importantly, the kind of resolve that came from finally understanding her own worth. By the time she reached the kitchen door, Margaret Harper was no longer the woman who'd arrived 3 days ago, hoping for family warmth and acceptance. She was a woman with a plan, a woman who'd remembered that power wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you took back for yourself. And she was just getting started. By the time she reached the kitchen door, Margaret Harper was no longer the woman who'd arrived 3 days ago hoping for family warmth and acceptance. She was a woman with a plan. A woman who'd remembered that power wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you took back for yourself. And she was just getting started. The kitchen buzzed with the kind of controlled chaos that Emma orchestrated so well. Richard and Patricia sat at the breakfast bar, regaling Kyle with stories from their antiquing expedition, while Emma arranged a spread of sandwiches and salads that looked like something from a magazine. Sarah sat cross-legged on one of the bar stools, picking at a turkey sandwich while scrolling through her phone. "There she is," Emma said with forced brightness as Maggie entered. "We were wondering where you'd gotten to." "Just making some phone calls," Maggie said, settling onto the remaining stool. "Catching up with old friends." Kyle looked up from his conversation with his in-laws, studying his mother's face with the kind of attention he usually reserved for legal briefs. Something in her tone had clearly registered as different, though he couldn't quite place what. "Anyone interesting?" he asked. "Janet Morrison. You remember Janet? We worked together at the hardware store for years before she got into real estate." "Oh yes," Emma said, passing Maggie a plate. "How is Janet these days?" "Busy," Maggie replied, accepting the sandwich without comment on its perfect presentation. "Apparently it's quite the seller's market right now. Property values are through the roof." The words landed in the conversation like stones dropped in still water, creating ripples that spread outward. Kyle's attention sharpened, and even Richard looked up from his story about a vintage sideboard they'd found. "Thinking of making a move?" Patricia asked, with the polite interest of someone making conversation. "Maybe," Maggie said, taking a bite of her sandwich. "Sometimes change is exactly what a person needs." Kyle set down his own sandwich, his lawyer's instincts apparently triggered by something in his mother's casual tone. "Mom, are you thinking about selling the house?" "I'm thinking about a lot of things," Maggie replied evenly. "It's amazing how much clarity you can gain when you have time to really reflect on your life and your priorities." Emma's smile became slightly strained. "Well, that's sudden. I thought you loved your house." "I do love it, but love doesn't always mean holding on forever, does it? Sometimes love means knowing when to let go." The double meaning wasn't lost on anyone at the table. Sarah looked up from her phone, her eyes moving between her grandmother and her parents with the keen awareness of someone who'd spent years learning to read the undercurrents of family conversations. "The market is definitely favorable for sellers right now," Richard offered, apparently trying to steer the conversation back to safer territory. "We've seen some remarkable appreciation in our Atlanta neighborhood as well." "Yes, Janet mentioned that properties in desirable areas are seeing multiple offers, often well above asking price," Maggie said, "especially when there are developers involved. They have the cash to move quickly and the vision to see potential that others might miss." Kyle's fork paused halfway to his mouth. Something about the way his mother had said developers sent a warning signal through his legal training. "Developers?" "Oh yes, they're very active in certain neighborhoods, looking for properties with good bones in established areas where they can add value through renovation." Maggie's voice remained conversational, but her eyes held a glint that Kyle had seen before, usually when she was about to make a point that would leave no room for argument. Some of them specialize in specific areas where they've already established relationships and understand the market dynamics. Emma set down her water glass with slightly more force than necessary. "That sounds very comprehensive." "It is." Janet was quite informative. "Did you know that there are companies that can close on a property in as little as 2 weeks, if all the conditions are right? Cash sales, minimal inspections, very streamlined process." 2 weeks, Kyle repeated slowly. "That's fast." "Sometimes fast is exactly what people need," Maggie said. "When you've made up your mind about something, why drag it out?" Sarah had stopped pretending to look at her phone and was now watching the adults with unconcealed fascination. There was clearly a conversation happening beneath the conversation, and while she might not understand all the implications, she could sense the tension ratcheting up with each exchange. "Mom," Kyle said carefully, "if you're really thinking about selling, don't you think we should talk about it? I mean, it's a big decision, and maybe I could help you think through the options." "Help me think through the options," Maggie repeated, her tone thoughtful. "How thoughtful of you to offer, though I have to say, I'm perfectly capable of thinking through my own options. I've been doing it for quite a while now." "I know you have, but what? But I might make a decision you don't approve of?" but I might do something that doesn't fit into your carefully organized view of how my life should go?" The words hung in the air like a challenge. Kyle's parents-in-law exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly recognizing that they'd stumbled into the middle of something much deeper than a casual conversation about real estate. "That's not what I meant," Kyle said, his voice strained. "Isn't it?" Maggie asked. "Because it seems to me that you've gotten quite comfortable with making decisions about what's best for me, where I should sleep, how I should feel about it, what level of respect I should expect from my own family." Emma's face flushed. "Maggie, if this is about the sleeping arrangements—" "This is about much more than sleeping arrangements," Maggie said, her voice finally carrying the full weight of her accumulated frustration. "This is about being treated like I matter, like my comfort and dignity are worth considering, like I'm more than just an obligation to be managed around your other priorities." The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a neighbor's lawnmower. Sarah stared at her grandmother with something approaching awe, as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Kyle rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture Maggie remembered from his childhood when he was trying to work through a problem that felt too big for him. "Mom, I'm sorry. You're right. The garage thing it wasn't right. We should have figured out something else." "Yes, you should have," Maggie agreed. "But you didn't. And that tells me everything I need to know about where I stand in your life. That's not fair." "Fair?" Maggie's voice rose slightly. "Kyle, I worked 3 jobs to put you through college. I postponed my own dreams, my own needs, my own life to make sure you had every opportunity. I taught you to value hard work, integrity, and respect for others. And now you're telling me it's not fair for me to expect those same values applied to me?" Kyle's face crumpled slightly, the successful lawyer facade cracking to reveal the little boy who'd once promised his mother he'd always take care of her. "I didn't mean, I don't want you to feel." "I know you don't," Maggie said, her tone softening slightly. "But intention doesn't erase impact. And the impact of being treated like an inconvenience by my own son is something I can't ignore anymore." Patricia cleared her throat delicately. "Perhaps Richard and I should." "No," Maggie said firmly. "Please stay. This isn't about you. This is about a family that's forgotten how to treat each other with basic respect." She turned back to Kyle, her eyes holding his with the kind of maternal intensity that could still make him feel 12 years old. "I called Janet because I'm tired of accepting less than I deserve. I'm tired of making myself smaller to fit into spaces where I'm not truly wanted. And I'm tired of teaching my granddaughter that love means tolerating disrespect." Sarah made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sigh. When Maggie looked at her, the girl's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "You deserve better, Grandma," Sarah said quietly. "I should have said something before. I should have stood up for you." "You're saying something now," Maggie replied. "That's what matters." Emma's carefully controlled composure finally cracked. "This is ridiculous. We're talking about one weekend, one set of sleeping arrangements that we clearly should have handled differently. Does that really justify, what? Selling your house out of spite?" "Spite?" Maggie laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Emma, this isn't spite. This is self-preservation. This is a woman finally understanding that she has choices, that she has power, and that she doesn't have to accept treatment that diminishes her worth." "But your house, you love that house." "I do love it, but I love myself more, and I'm finally ready to act like it." Kyle stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the tile floor. "Mom, please, can we talk about this privately? Work something out." "Work something out," Maggie repeated. "Like what? Like promising to treat me better in the future? Like offering me a real bedroom next time? Like remembering to include me in your family plans instead of working around me like an obstacle?" "Yes," Kyle said desperately. "Yes, exactly like that." "I can do better. We can do better." Maggie studied her son's face, seeing the genuine distress there, the dawning realization of how far he'd drifted from the values she'd tried to instill in him. For a moment, her resolve wavered. This was Kyle, her baby, the little boy she'd raised with such hopes and dreams. There. But then she thought about the garage, about the casual dismissal of her needs, about Emma's assertion that she was difficult for expecting basic courtesy. She thought about Sarah watching, learning what it looked like when women accepted less than they deserved. "Kyle," she said gently, "you can't undo what's already been done. You can't take back the message you've sent about my value in your life. But what you can do is learn from this. You can remember that the people who love you most are the ones most likely to be taken for granted. And you can make sure this never happens again." "It won't," Kyle said quickly. "I promise it won't." "Good," Maggie said, standing and carrying her plate to the sink. "But my decisions about my own life and my own property are no longer contingent on your promises. They're contingent on what I know I need to be happy and healthy and respected." She turned back to face the table, where her family sat in various states of shock and confusion. "I'm going to pack my things now. I'll be driving home this afternoon." "But," Emma started. "But what? The weekend isn't over? I should stay and pretend this conversation never happened? That everything is fine between us?" Maggie shook her head. "I'm done pretending, Emma. I'm done being convenient." As she walked toward the garage to gather her belongings, Maggie heard the explosion of voices behind her. Kyle and Emma arguing in urgent whispers, Sarah's young voice cutting through with questions and observations that her parents clearly weren't ready to answer. But for the first time in years, Maggie wasn't concerned with managing other people's reactions to her choices. She was concerned with making choices that honored her own worth, regardless of how uncomfortable those choices made other people. The garage looked different now, not like a place of exile, but like a catalyst. The air mattress that had felt like humiliation just hours ago now felt like the beginning of something new. A wake-up call that had finally gotten through. As she folded her clothes back into her suitcase, Maggie's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Janet Morrison. "Talk to a colleague about your area. If you're serious about selling, I think we could get you a very attractive offer very quickly. Call me when you're ready to move forward." Maggie stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm ready." The response came immediately. "Excellent. I'll start putting together the paperwork." Outside the garage, Maggie could hear her family still processing the aftershocks of their conversation. She could hear Kyle's voice, strained and urgent, trying to find a way to fix what he was finally beginning to understand he'd broken. But fixing things would take more than words or promises. It would take fundamental changes in how he thought about family, respect, and the woman who'd given him everything. And while those changes were happening or not happening, Maggie Harper would be busy reclaiming her life, one decision at a time. Outside the garage, Maggie could hear her family still processing the aftershocks of their conversation. She could hear Kyle's voice, strained and urgent, trying to find a way to fix what he was finally beginning to understand he'd broken. But fixing things would take more than words or promises. It would take fundamental changes in how he thought about family, respect, and the woman who'd given him everything. The drive home felt like traveling between two different worlds. Behind her lay Kyle's perfectly manicured neighborhood, with its climate-controlled garage and family dysfunction, dressed up in designer clothes. Ahead lay her own modest house, with its overgrown garden and honest imperfections. For the first time in years, she was eager to see it. Maggie's phone rang as she pulled into her driveway. Kyle's name flashed on the screen, and she let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again. And again. By the fourth call, she answered. "Mom, please. We need to talk about this." "We did talk about it," Maggie said, stepping out of her car and breathing in the familiar scent of her neighbor's orange trees. "You heard what I had to say. But you can't make life-changing decisions based on one bad weekend." Maggie paused at her front door, keys in hand. "Kyle, this wasn't one bad weekend. This was the culmination of years of feeling like I don't matter to you. The garage was just the final proof." "That's not true. You do matter. You matter more than anything. Then why doesn't your behavior reflect that?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of Kyle's breathing and the distant noise of what sounded like an argument in the background. "Is that Emma?" Maggie asked. "She's upset. She thinks you're overreacting." Of course she does. Maggie unlocked her door and stepped into the cool darkness of her own home. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The morning newspapers still folded on her kitchen table, her coffee mug still in the sink from 3 days ago. It felt like returning to herself. Mom, please, can we just slow down? Talk this through like rational adults? I am being rational, Kyle. For the first time in years, I'm being completely rational about what I will and won't accept in my life. She heard Emma's voice more clearly now, sharp and frustrated. Tell her she's being manipulative. Tell her this isn't fair to Sarah. Maggie's grip tightened on the phone. Put Emma on. Mom, I don't think. Put her on, Kyle. A moment later, Emma's voice came through, carefully controlled but with an edge of anger underneath. Maggie, I think we need to discuss this situation calmly. I'm perfectly calm, Maggie replied. Are you? I'm concerned about the message you're sending to Sarah. She's very upset, thinking this is somehow her fault because she didn't speak up about the sleeping arrangements. Sarah is upset because she's finally old enough to recognize injustice when she sees it. That's called developing a moral compass, Emma. You should be proud. This isn't about morality. This is about you punishing Kyle for what amounts to a logistical oversight. Logistical oversight. Maggie almost laughed. Emma, let me ask you something. If your parents had been told they were sleeping in the garage while I got the guest room, how would you have felt about that? That's completely different. How? How is it different? They're older, they have health issues. I'm 68 years old, Emma. I have arthritis in my back and hands. I drove 12 hours to be with my family. How exactly am I less deserving of consideration than people who decided to visit at the last minute? Another silence, and Maggie could almost hear Emma searching for a response that didn't sound as callous as the truth. Look, Emma finally said. Maybe we handled it poorly. But this reaction, threatening to sell your house, leaving early, it's disproportionate. It's designed to make us feel guilty. You should feel guilty, Maggie said simply. Because you behaved in a way that warrants guilt. And if you don't feel guilty, then we have a much bigger problem than sleeping arrangements. Kyle is devastated, Emma said, switching tactics. You're breaking his heart. Kyle is devastated because he's finally seeing the consequences of taking me for granted. That's not my responsibility to fix anymore, Emma. That's his responsibility to learn from. She heard Kyle's voice in the background, asking for the phone back, but Emma continued. What about Sarah? What about your relationship with your granddaughter? It was a low blow, and they both knew it. Sarah will always be welcome in my life, wherever my life takes me. She's also old enough to understand that sometimes people need to make difficult choices to preserve their dignity and self-respect. That's actually a valuable lesson for a young woman to learn. Emma handed the phone back to Kyle without another word. Mom. Kyle's voice was strained, exhausted. What do you want from me? What do I need to do to fix this? I want you to understand that this isn't something you can fix with a phone call or a promise to do better next time. I want you to sit with the discomfort of knowing that you hurt someone who loves you. I want you to figure out how you became the kind of man who puts his mother in a garage. I never meant. I know you didn't mean it. That's almost worse, Kyle. It means treating me with disrespect has become so natural to you that you don't even notice when you're doing it. Maggie walked through her house as they talked, touching familiar objects. Her grandmother's quilt draped over the sofa, the photographs of Kyle's childhood that Emma had never wanted, displayed in their perfectly curated home, the collection of books she'd been meaning to read for months. Tell me what to do, Kyle said quietly. Tell me how to make this right. Learn to see me as a person worthy of respect, rather than an obligation to be managed. Include me in your life because you want me there, not because you feel you should. And most importantly, Kyle, figure out what kind of man you want to be. Because the man who put his mother in a garage isn't the man I raised. After she hung up, Maggie sat in her living room and let the silence wash over her. Her house felt bigger somehow, as if making a stand for herself had expanded the space she was allowed to occupy in the world. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Grandma, I'm so sorry, I should have said something. Mom and Dad are fighting and I feel terrible. Maggie typed back. Sweet girl, this is not your fault. Your parents are learning some hard truths about themselves, and that's uncomfortable, but necessary. You did nothing wrong. Can I call you later, when things calm down here? Of course, anytime. I love you. I love you too, baby, always. The next morning brought Janet Morrison to Maggie's doorstep, with a folder full of paperwork and a kind expression of barely contained excitement. Maggie, honey, I ran the numbers 3 times because I couldn't believe them myself, Janet said, spreading documents across Maggie's kitchen table. Your house is worth significantly more than I thought. The market in this area has just exploded. The figure Janet pointed to made Maggie's eyebrows rise. Her modest 3-bedroom house with its dated kitchen and small yard was worth nearly $300,000, almost double what she'd paid for it 8 years ago when she'd moved to Florida. That seems impossible, Maggie said. It's the location. You're close to good schools, low crime, and there's been a lot of development in the area. Plus, your house has character, original hardwood floors, solid construction, mature landscaping. Developers love properties like this because they can either renovate or tear down and rebuild depending on their vision. Developers. The word that had made Kyle so uncomfortable just 24 hours ago. How quickly could I sell if I decided to move forward? In this market, with the right buyer, we could close in 2 weeks. I already have 3 clients who would be interested, a young family looking to renovate, an investor who flips houses, and… Janet paused, consulting her notes. A development company that's been very active in the area. What kind of development company? They buy properties in established neighborhoods, usually tear down and rebuild with modern amenities. They pay cash, close fast, and they're not picky about condition. The downside is they typically offer slightly below market value because they're taking on all the risk and renovation costs. But they're legitimate? Oh yes. Sunshine Development Group. They've done beautiful work throughout Central Florida. Very professional, very reliable. Sunshine Development Group. The same company Maggie had researched yesterday. The same company that had been active in Kyle's neighborhood. What kind of properties do they typically look for? Older homes in desirable areas with good bones and development potential. Your place would be perfect for them, actually. They could renovate it as a modern family home or potentially tear down and build something larger if the lot permits. Maggie nodded thoughtfully. An idea was forming, still vague but gaining shape. Janet, hypothetically speaking, if I were to sell to this development company, would they be interested in other properties? In other neighborhoods? Oh, absolutely. They're always looking for opportunities. Why? Just curious about how these companies operate. Whether they focus on specific areas or if they cast a wider net. Janet's real estate instincts were clearly pinging. Maggie, is there something specific you're thinking about? Because if you have information about other potential properties… Let me think about it, Maggie said. For now, I'd like to know more about the process. What would I need to do if I decided to move forward? They spent the next hour going through the paperwork, discussing timelines and logistics. Janet explained the process of preparing a house for sale, the importance of disclosure documents, the various contingencies that could affect closing dates. The beauty of selling to a development company is that they typically buy as is, Janet explained. No repairs, no staging, no open houses. You just pack up and go. Pack up and go. The phrase had an appealing simplicity to it. After Janet left, Maggie found herself walking through her house with new eyes. She'd been happy here, building a quiet life centered around her garden, her books, and the occasional visit from Kyle and his family. But happiness and complacency weren't the same thing, and she was beginning to understand that she'd confused the two. Horiel. Her phone rang around noon. Kyle again. I've been thinking about what you said, he began without preamble, about what kind of man I want to be. And? I want to be the kind of man my mother can be proud of. The kind of man who treats the people he loves with the respect they deserve. That's a good start, Maggie said carefully. I talked to Emma. We had a long conversation about how we've been treating you, about the example we're setting for Sarah. She sees things differently now. Does she? She wants to apologize. She wants to make things right. Maggie sat down at her kitchen table, surrounded by the papers Janet had left behind. Kyle, I appreciate that you've been thinking about this. I really do. But I need you to understand something important. What? This isn't about apologies anymore. This isn't about anyone making things right for me. This is about me making things right for myself. I don't understand. I know you don't. And that's okay. You don't have to understand my choices, Kyle. You just have to respect them. There was a long pause before Kyle spoke again, his voice smaller than she'd heard it in years. Are you really gonna sell the house? Maggie looked around her kitchen, at the morning lights streaming through windows she'd hung curtains in, at the table where she'd eaten thousands of meals, at the refrigerator covered with pictures of Sarah growing up. I'm really considering it, she said honestly. But where would you go? What would you do? I don't know yet. And you know what? For the first time in my adult life, I find that exciting rather than terrifying. After hanging up, Maggie poured herself a cup of coffee and sat back down with Janet's paperwork. Change was coming. She could feel it in her bones, in the shifting energy of her own thoughts and feelings. The question wasn't whether to change anymore. The question was how dramatic that change would be. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Janet's number. Before she could second-guess herself, she pressed call. Janet? It's Maggie. I'd like to move forward with getting that market analysis for my house. And I'd also like to learn more about Sunshine Development Group. Wonderful. I can set up a meeting for as early as tomorrow if you'd like. Tomorrow would be perfect, Maggie said, surprised by how calm she felt. I think it's time to explore my options. As she hung up, Maggie realized she was smiling for the first time since leaving Kyle's house. Not the careful, accommodating smile she'd perfected over years of making other people comfortable, but a real smile. The smile of a woman who was finally ready to prioritize her own happiness. The smile of a woman who was just getting started, aiming her life one decision at a time. As she hung up, Maggie realized she was smiling for the first time since leaving Kyle's house. Not the careful, accommodating smile she'd perfected over years of making other people comfortable, but a real smile. The smile of a woman who was finally ready to prioritize her own happiness. The smile of a woman who was just getting started. The call came at 7:30 that evening, just as Maggie was settling in with a cup of tea and the book she'd been trying to finish for months. Sarah's name appeared on her phone screen, and Maggie could hear tension in her granddaughter's voice before she even said hello. Grandma, I need to talk to you. Of course, sweetheart, what's going on? Everything's a mess here, Sarah said, her words tumbling out in a rush. Mom and Dad have been fighting ever since you left. Not yelling fights, but those scary quiet fights where they think I can't hear them, but I can hear every word through the walls. Maggie set down her tea, giving Sarah her full attention. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, baby. I'm not caught in the middle, Sarah said with surprising firmness. I'm on your side. That's what I called to tell you. The words hit Maggie with unexpected force. Sarah, no, let me finish. I talked to Mom and Dad tonight. I told them exactly what I thought about how they treated you. Despite everything, Maggie felt a flutter of concern. Sweetheart, you don't need to fight my battles for me. This isn't just your battle, Grandma. This is about what kind of family we are. This is about what kind of person I want to be. Sarah's voice carried a maturity that made Maggie's chest tight with pride and worry. Do you want to know what I told them? If you want to share it. I told them they should be ashamed of themselves. Maggie closed her eyes, imagining Kyle and Emma's faces when their teenage daughter delivered that particular judgment. I told them that you're the strongest, most generous person I know, and that you deserved so much better than being stuck in a garage like some unwanted piece of furniture. I told them that if they couldn't see how wrong that was, then they needed to take a long, hard look at themselves. What did they say? Dad looked like he was going to cry. Mom got that expression she gets when she's trying to control her temper, and started talking about how family dynamics are complicated and I don't understand all the factors involved. And what did you say to that? Sarah's laugh was sharp, reminding Maggie suddenly of herself at that age. I said that some things aren't complicated at all, like treating your mother with basic respect, like making sure the person who raised you feels welcome in your home, Like not putting appearances ahead of family. Maggie felt tears prick at her eyes. Oh, sweetheart. I'm not done. I also told them that I've been watching how they treat you for years, and it's been getting worse. Like, remember my 16th birthday party? You offered to help with the decorations, and Mom basically told you she had it handled and you should just relax. But then she complained for weeks about how stressful it was to plan everything by herself. The memory stung because it was so typical. Maggie had learned to offer help while expecting rejection, to smile while being dismissed as unnecessary. Or last Christmas when you brought that photo album of Dad's childhood, and Mom put it away in a closet because it didn't match their decorating theme. Do you know I had to sneak it out to look at it? Those were pictures of my dad as a little boy, and she hid them because they weren't aesthetic enough. Each example Sarah cited was like a small knife, not because they were individually devastating, but because together they painted a picture of systematic dismissal that Maggie had been too close to see clearly. I've been complicit in it, Sarah continued, her voice breaking slightly. I've watched them make you smaller and smaller, and I didn't say anything because it was easier to pretend everything was fine. But I can't pretend anymore. Not after seeing you sleep in that garage. Baby, you were. I was old enough to know better, Sarah interrupted. I was old enough to speak up. And I didn't, because I was a coward. You're not a coward. You're 17 years old, and this isn't your responsibility. It is my responsibility to stand up for what's right. You taught me that. When did I teach you that? All those stories you used to tell me about your job at the hardware store. About standing up to customers who were rude to your coworkers, even when your boss told you to just keep them happy. About the time you reported that contractor who was cheating elderly customers, even though it cost the store business. Maggie had forgotten about those stories, casual anecdotes shared during afternoons when Sarah was younger and more interested in her grandmother's adventures than her parents' achievements. You always said that being nice wasn't the same as being good, that sometimes being good meant making people uncomfortable. You remembered that? I remember everything you taught me, Grandma, about being strong, about standing up for yourself, about not letting people treat you like you don't matter. And then I watched my parents do exactly that to you. And I said nothing. Sarah was crying now, soft sniffles that made Maggie wish she could reach through the phone and hold her granddaughter. I'm proud of you for speaking up now, Maggie said gently. That took courage. Mom said I was being disrespectful. She said family loyalty means supporting each other, not airing dirty laundry or taking sides. What do you think about that? I think loyalty to a person who's wrong isn't loyalty at all, it's just enabling. And I think the dirty laundry was already aired the minute they put you in that garage. Smart girl. Harold would have loved her fierce sense of justice, her unwillingness to accept comfortable lies. How did the conversation end? With Mom storming out and Dad asking me if I really thought he was a bad son. Sarah's voice was steadier now, as if telling the story had helped her process it. I told him I thought he was a good man who'd forgotten some important things about how to treat people he loves. I told him it wasn't too late to remember, but that saying sorry wouldn't be enough. He'd have to actually change. And what did he say to that? He asked me what I thought he should do, so I told him. Maggie felt a smile tugging at her lips despite the seriousness of the conversation. What did you tell him? I told him he should call you every week, not just when he needs something or when Mom reminds him it's been too long. I told him he should visit you at your house sometimes, instead of always expecting you to come here. I told him he should ask about your life, your friends, your interests, instead of just giving you updates about his work and assuming you don't have anything important going on. Each suggestion was a small indictment, highlighting years of one-sided communication and interest. Most importantly, Sarah continued, I told him he should listen to you. Really listen. Not just wait for his turn to talk or think about how to fix whatever you're saying, but actually hear you. That's very wise advice. I learned it from watching what he doesn't do. The honesty of that statement hung between them for a moment. Grandma, can I ask you something? Anything. Are you really going to sell your house? Maggie looked around her living room, taking in all the familiar details that had become invisible through routine. I'm considering it. Because of what happened here? Because you're mad at us? Because I'm finally ready to put my own happiness first, Maggie said carefully. Because I'm tired of living my life around other people's convenience and comfort. Where would you go? I don't know yet. Maybe somewhere I've never been. Maybe somewhere I can start fresh and meet new people and have adventures I've been putting off. That sounds scary. It does. But it also sounds exciting. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Would you still want to see me? If you moved away or sold the house or whatever? The question broke Maggie's heart. Oh, sweetheart. You are the most important person in my life. Nothing could ever change that. No matter where I go or what I do, you will always have a place with me. Even if Mom and Dad are mad about it? Especially if Mom and Dad are mad about it. Your relationship with me is yours, Sarah. It doesn't belong to them, and they don't get to control it. Good, Sarah said, her voice fierce again. Because I'm not done being mad at them yet. Don't carry that anger too long, baby. It's not good for you. I'll stop being angry when they start acting like the people you raised Dad to be. After they hung up, Maggie sat in her quiet living room processing the conversation. Sarah's fierce loyalty was both heartwarming and heartbreaking. Heartwarming because it showed the girl's strong moral compass. Heartbreaking because she'd been forced to choose sides in a conflict that should never have involved her. But perhaps it was good for Sarah to see that people could stand up for themselves, that love didn't require accepting poor treatment, that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone's bad behavior. Her phone buzzed with a text from Kyle. Sarah told us about your conversation. Can we please talk? I know I've screwed this up, but I want to do better. Maggie stared at the message for a long time before responding. I'm glad Sarah talked to you. She's braver than any of us. She gets that from you. Maybe. Or maybe she's just tired of watching the adults in her life act like children. That's fair. I deserve that. Kyle, I need you to understand something. Sarah speaking up doesn't change anything between us. I'm still moving forward with my plans. What plans? Maggie hesitated, then decided on honesty. I'm meeting with a real estate agent tomorrow to discuss selling the house. The typing indicator appeared and disappeared several times before Kyle's response came. Is there anything I can do to change your mind? You can work on becoming the man you want to be, regardless of what I do. You can build a better relationship with your daughter. You can examine how you treat the people you love, and make sure your actions match your intentions. But you're still going to sell? I'm still going to explore my options. This is about me now, Kyle. This is about what I need to feel happy and valued and respected. I understand, but Maggie wasn't sure he did. Kyle was still thinking in terms of transactions, what he could do to change her mind, what promises he could make to restore the status quo. He wasn't yet thinking in terms of fundamental change, of examining his own behavior and motivations regardless of external consequences. That would have to be his journey to take. Maggie was finally ready to focus on her own. She picked up her phone and scrolled to Janet's number, typing out a text. I'd like to move our meeting up if possible. I'm ready to hear more about those development companies. The response came quickly. I can have someone from Sunshine Development meet with us tomorrow afternoon if you're available. Perfect, Maggie typed back. Let's do it. As she got ready for bed that night, Maggie thought about Sarah's courage in confronting her parents, about the girl's refusal to accept comfortable lies about family loyalty and respect. Sarah was learning early what Maggie had taken 68 years to understand, that love without respect was just dependence, that family without boundaries was just obligation, and that sometimes the most loving thing you could do was refuse to enable someone's bad behavior. Tomorrow, she would take the next step in reclaiming her own life. Tonight, she would sleep peacefully in her own bed, in her own house, surrounded by her own choices. And for the first time in years, that felt like exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow, she would take the next step in reclaiming her own life. Tonight, she would sleep peacefully in her own bed, in her own house, surrounded by her own choices. And for the first time in years, that felt like exactly where she belonged. The morning brought an unexpected visitor. Maggie was watering her tomato plants when she heard footsteps on her front path. She looked up to see Kyle standing there, still in his work clothes from what must have been an early morning drive from his house to hers. I hope it's okay that I came by, he said, his hands shoved deep in his pockets like a little boy preparing for a difficult conversation. "It's your choice to make," Maggie replied, continuing to tend her plants. The routine gave her something to focus on, besides the tension radiating from her son. "I've been thinking about what Sarah said, about the kind of man I want to be." Maggie moved to the next plant, testing the soil with her finger before adjusting the water flow. "And what conclusion did you reach? That I've been a terrible son?" "That's not what I asked." Kyle was quiet for so long that Maggie finally looked up at him. His face was drawn, older somehow than it had been just 3 days ago, when she'd arrived at his house full of hope for family connection. "I want to be the kind of man who sees people for who they are, not just for what they can do for me," he said finally. "I want to be the kind of man who pays attention to the people he loves, who makes time for them, who treats them like they matter." "That's a good start." "Is it enough to change your mind about selling?" Maggie turned off the hose and faced her son fully. "Kyle, I need you to understand something very important. My decision about my house has nothing to do with punishing you and everything to do with taking care of myself. But if you change, it should be because you want to be a better person, not because you're trying to manipulate me into staying in a situation that makes me feel small and unimportant." Kyle's face flushed. "That's not what I'm trying to do, isn't it? You're here asking me to reconsider a major life decision based on promises of future behavior. That sounds like manipulation to me, even if you don't mean it that way." She walked toward her back porch, gesturing for him to follow. They sat in the wicker chairs she'd bought at a garage sale last spring, looking out over the garden she'd spent 8 years cultivating. "Tell me about your week," she said. Kyle looked confused by the change of subject. "My week?" "Yes. What did you do this week? What made you happy? What frustrated you? What are you thinking about these days besides work?" Why are you asking?" "Because I realized something yesterday. I don't actually know you anymore, Kyle. I know your job title. I know you're married to Emma and have a daughter named Sarah. I know you live in a big house in a nice neighborhood. But I don't know who you are as a person." Kyle stared at his hands. "I don't know if I know either." The honesty of that admission struck Maggie like a physical blow. "When did that happen?" "I don't know. Somewhere along the way I became this collection of roles and responsibilities. Lawyer, husband, father, son. I stopped being Kyle and became this thing that performs Kyle for everyone else." Maggie felt her anger beginning to soften, not into forgiveness exactly, but into something more complex. "And what does performing Kyle for me look like?" "Calling on holidays. Visiting when Emma reminds me it's been too long. Asking about your health and your garden, and then talking about my work because I don't know what else to say." "And what would authentic Kyle look like?" Kyle was quiet for a long moment, and Maggie could see him struggling with a question he'd apparently never seriously considered. "I don't know," he said finally. "I think I lost him somewhere around the time I decided that success meant never showing weakness or uncertainty or need." "Did I teach you that?" No, you taught me the opposite. You taught me that asking for help was brave, that showing feelings was human, that taking care of people you love was more important than impressing people you don't." "Then where did you learn the other thing?" Kyle gestured vaguely toward his expensive clothes, his carefully styled hair, the BMW parked in her driveway. "Law school. The firm. Emma's family. The whole world, really. The message that being vulnerable makes you weak. That needing people makes you a burden. That love is something you earn through achievement rather than something you're worthy of, just for existing." Maggie felt a familiar ache in her chest. The pain of watching your child lose pieces of themselves in pursuit of things that ultimately couldn't satisfy them. "Kyle, can I tell you something?" "Of course. I'm proud of your success. I'm proud that you built a good life, that you can provide for your family, that you're respected in your profession. But I would trade all of that in a heartbeat to have back the little boy who used to tell me about his dreams and his fears and his theories about why clouds move." Kyle's eyes filled with tears. I miss him too. He's still in there. But you've buried him under so many layers of performance and protection that even you can't find him anymore. How do I find him again? Start by being honest about what you want and need, instead of just reacting to what other people expect from you. Start by having conversations instead of just exchanging information. Start by taking emotional risks with the people you love. Like what? Like telling me when you're scared or confused or lonely, instead of just giving me status updates about your career. Like asking for my advice about something that actually matters to you. Like spending time with me because you enjoy my company, not because you think you should. Kyle wiped his eyes with the back of his hand. I do enjoy your company, I don't know how to relax anymore. I don't know how to just be with people without feeling like I need to manage the conversation or fix something or prove something. Practice, Maggie said simply. Start small. Tell me one true thing about your life right now. Kyle thought for a moment. I'm lonely. Even when I'm surrounded by people, I feel lonely most of the time. I feel like I'm performing for everyone, including Emma and Sarah, and nobody really knows me because I don't let them. Thank you for telling me that. It doesn't fix anything. It's not supposed to fix anything. It's supposed to be true. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching a cardinal build a nest in Maggie's orange tree. It was the kind of moment Maggie had been hoping for during her disastrous Thanksgiving visit. Simple, honest, connected. Mom? Kyle said finally. Yes? If you do sell the house, where would you go? I don't know. Maybe somewhere I've never been. Maybe I'll travel for a while, see parts of the country I've only read about. That sounds lonely, Maggie considered this. It might be. But there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I've been lonely in rooms full of people who were supposed to love me. I might not be lonely at all on my own. Would you want company sometimes? If you traveled? What kind of company? Maybe a son who's trying to remember how to be a real person, instead of just a collection of roles and achievements. Maggie felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but the possibility of it. That would depend on whether that son was interested in getting to know his mother as a real person too, instead of just managing her as an obligation. I would like that. Getting to know you, I mean. I realized yesterday that I know almost nothing about your life. Your friends, your interests, what you think about when you're alone. I know what you were when I was a child, but I don't know who you are now. I garden, I read, I volunteer at the library twice a week helping people with computer problems. I take a water aerobics class on Mondays and Thursdays with a group of women who make me laugh until my sides hurt. I'm learning to paint watercolors, and I'm terrible at it, but I love it anyway. Kyle listened with the kind of attention she hadn't seen from him in years. That sounds like a good life. It is a good life. It's my life. But it's also a life that's been shaped around the assumption that I'm not important enough to be included in anyone else's. You're important to me. I know you think I am. But thinking and acting are different things. Kyle nodded slowly. What would acting like you're important look like? Calling because you want to talk to me, not because it's been a certain number of weeks. Asking about my painting or my water aerobics class, not just my health. Including me in family decisions instead of just informing me about them after they're made. Visiting my house sometimes instead of always expecting me to come to yours. Those things seem not that hard. They're not hard at all. They just require thinking of me as a whole person instead of just your mother. Kyle was quiet again, processing. Mom? The meeting you have today with the real estate people, is it definite? Are you definitely selling? I'm gathering information, making informed decisions about my options. If you do decide to sell, would you tell me before you sign anything? Not to try to change your mind, just so I know? Yes. And if I start calling more, visiting more, being more present, would you be willing to give me a chance to show you that I can be different? Maggie looked at her son's face, seeing glimpses of the little boy he'd once been alongside the successful man he'd become. Kyle, I've been giving you chances your whole life. The question isn't whether I'll give you another chance. The question is whether you'll take it seriously enough to actually change. I will, I want to. Good. But do it for yourself, not for me. Do it because you want to be the kind of person who treats people well, not because you want to avoid consequences. After Kyle left, Maggie found herself both hopeful and cautious. The conversation had felt different, more honest, more vulnerable, more like the relationship she'd always wanted with her son. But she'd learned not to mistake intentions for actions, possibilities for realities. At 2 o'clock, Janet arrived with David Chen from Sunshine Development Group. David was younger than Maggie had expected, probably in his early 40s, with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that came from success in a competitive business. "Mrs. Harper, thank you for taking the time to meet with us," he said as they settled around her kitchen table. "Janet tells me you're considering putting your property on the market." "I'm exploring my options," Maggie replied carefully. David pulled out a tablet and began showing her examples of Sunshine Development's work in the area. "We specialize in properties like yours. Solid bones, established neighborhoods, good location, but in need of updating to meet modern expectations." The photos were impressive. Houses similar to hers transformed into gleaming showcases with open floor plans, updated kitchens, and carefully curated curb appeal. "What would your timeline look like?" Maggie asked. "If you decide to move forward, we could close in 2 weeks. Cash purchase, no inspections, no repairs required on your part. You'd simply pack up and move on to your next adventure." Next adventure. The phrase resonated in ways Maggie hadn't expected. "And what about other properties? Do you work in multiple areas?" "Oh yes, we're very active throughout Central Florida. We have projects in Winter Park, Altamonte Springs, several developments in the Lake Mary area, Lake Mary, where Kyle lived." "That's interesting," Maggie said casually. "I have family in that area. Do you find good opportunities there?" "Absolutely. Beautiful neighborhood, excellent schools, very desirable for families. We're always looking for the right properties in that market." Maggie nodded, filing the information away. "And your process for identifying potential properties? Sometimes sellers come to us, like you're doing today. Sometimes we identify properties that would be good fits and reach out to owners to see if they might be interested in selling." "I see." After David and Janet left, Maggie sat alone in her kitchen with the paperwork they'd given her. Everything was moving faster than she'd expected, but somehow that felt right. She'd spent too many years moving slowly, accommodating other people's timelines and preferences. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "How did your meeting go?" "Informative," Maggie typed back. "I'm learning about all sorts of possibilities I never considered before." "Are you excited or scared?" "Both. Is that weird?" "No, that's the best kind of feeling. It means something important is about to happen." Smart girl. Sarah understood what it had taken Maggie 68 years to learn. That the most meaningful changes often came wrapped in equal parts terror and exhilaration. As evening settled over her garden, Maggie found herself thinking about David's comment about reaching out to property owners who might be interested in selling. She thought about Kyle's house with its perfect lawn and 3-car garage. She thought about the way real estate markets worked, about supply and demand, about the power of having exactly what someone else needed. Tomorrow, she would make some decisions about her own future. Tonight, she would enjoy the quiet anticipation of a woman who finally understood her own worth and was ready to act on it. The storm was coming. But Margaret Harper was no longer afraid of storms. The storm was coming. But Margaret Harper was no longer afraid of storms. She spent the evening reviewing the paperwork from David Chen, calculating numbers and possibilities with the kind of clarity that came from finally knowing what she wanted. By the time she went to bed, she had made her decision. The call came at 8:15 the next morning. Emma's name on the caller ID made Maggie pause before answering. "Maggie, we need to talk." Emma's voice was tight, controlled, but Maggie could hear the strain underneath. "Good morning to you too, Emma. Kyle told me about his visit yesterday. About your conversation." "Did he?" "He came home. Different. Talking about how he's lost himself, how he needs to change, how he's been a terrible son." Emma's tone suggested she found these developments less than welcome. "I think you're manipulating him." Maggie almost laughed. "I'm manipulating him by having an honest conversation? You're making him feel guilty for being successful. You're making him question his priorities and his choices." "Emma, if Kyle is questioning his priorities, that's between him and his conscience. I can't make anyone feel guilty about something they don't actually feel guilty about." He was fine before this whole garage thing blew up. He was happy with his life. Was he? Because yesterday he told me he feels lonely and disconnected from everyone he loves. That doesn't sound like happiness to me. There was a pause, and Maggie could practically hear Emma recalibrating her approach. "Look, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I know the sleeping arrangements weren't ideal, and I'm sorry about that. But this reaction, threatening to sell your house, making Kyle question everything about his life, it's not proportional to what happened. Emma, let me ask you something. If someone treated you the way you and Kyle treated me that weekend, how would you feel?" It was one weekend, Maggie, one set of circumstances that we handled poorly. It was the culmination of years of being treated as an afterthought in my son's life. The garage was just the final proof of where I stand in your family's hierarchy. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time Kyle called me just to talk? When was the last time you invited me to your house without it being a holiday obligation? When was the last time either of you asked about my life, my interests, my feelings about anything that didn't directly impact you? Silence stretched between them, and Maggie realized that Emma was finally beginning to understand the scope of what she'd missed. "We can do better," Emma said finally. "Kyle wants to do better, but not if you're going to punish us by upending your entire life. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm finally prioritizing my own happiness. By selling your house out of spite? By selling my house because I want to, because it's mine to sell, and I've decided that change might be exactly what I need." Emma's voice sharpened. "And what about Sarah? What about your granddaughter who loves you and wants you in her life?" It was a low blow, using Sarah as leverage, and they both knew it. "Sarah will always have a place in my life, wherever that life takes me, but I won't let concern for Sarah be used to manipulate me into accepting poor treatment from her parents. We don't treat you poorly." "Emma," Maggie's voice carried a finality that cut through Emma's protests. "I spent 3 days in your garage. I think we can stop pretending about how you treat me." The silence that followed was different. Heavier, more real. When Emma spoke again, her voice was smaller. "What do you want from us? I want you to examine your own behavior and decide what kind of people you want to be. I want you to build a genuine relationship with me instead of just managing me as an obligation. But mostly, I want you to stop assuming that my decisions are about you, but they are about us. Selling your house, moving away? No, Emma, they're about me. About what I need to feel valued and respected and happy. The fact that my happiness might inconvenience you doesn't make it less valid." After ending the call, Maggie sat in her kitchen feeling drained but resolved. The conversation had confirmed what she already knew. Emma still saw Maggie's assertion of independence as something to be managed and controlled rather than respected. Her phone rang again. This time it was Kyle. "Mom, Emma told me about your conversation." "I'm sure she did. She's upset. She thinks you're trying to hurt us." "Kyle, I need you to listen to me very carefully. I am not trying to hurt anyone. I am trying to build a life where I feel valued and respected. If that hurts you, then you need to ask yourself why. Because we love you. Because you're family. Because the thought of you selling your house and moving away feels like losing you." "You've been losing me for years," Maggie said gently. "You just didn't notice because I was doing it quietly, making myself smaller and smaller until I almost disappeared entirely. That's not what we wanted. I know it's not what you wanted. But it's what happened, and now I'm choosing to reverse that process. By leaving? By putting myself first for once in my adult life." Kyle was quiet for a long moment. "What if we really change? What if we prove to you that things can be different? Then you'll be better people who treat the people you love with respect and consideration. That's its own reward, Kyle. It doesn't require my presence to be worthwhile. But would you stay if we really changed?" Maggie closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the question. Kyle, I've made a decision to sell my house. That decision isn't contingent on your behavior, good or bad. It's about what I need for my own life. So nothing we do matters? Everything you do matters. It matters for you, for Emma, for Sarah, for your own sense of integrity and self-respect. But it doesn't matter for my decision about my property. I don't understand the difference. The difference is that I'm finally choosing my own happiness instead of waiting for other people to choose it for me. There was a long pause before Kyle spoke again, his voice thick with emotion. Are you really going to do it? Sell the house? Yes. When? Soon. Can I see you before you make it final? Can we have one more conversation? Maggie considered this. Kyle, we can have as many conversations as you want, but not about changing my mind, not about convincing me to stay. We can talk about building a real relationship regardless of where I live or what I do. Okay. Yes, I'd like that. Good. But I want you to understand something important. This isn't the end of our relationship. This is the beginning of an honest one. After Kyle hung up, Maggie called Janet Morrison. Janet, it's Maggie. I've made my decision. And? I want to move forward with Sunshine Development as quickly as possible. Are you sure? This is a big step. I'm sure I'm ready for a big step. I'll call David Chen right now. With their process, we could have papers signed by the end of the week. Perfect. Maggie, can I ask what changed your mind? Yesterday you seemed like you were still considering options. Maggie looked around her kitchen, taking in the morning light streaming through windows she'd cleaned countless times. The coffee maker that had brewed thousands of cups. The table where she'd eaten so many solitary meals. I realized that I was still waiting for permission to live my own life. I'm done waiting. Good for you, Janet said, and Maggie could hear the smile in her voice. I think this is going to be the beginning of a wonderful adventure. As Maggie hung up the phone, she felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years. Pure excitement about the future. Not cautious hope or resigned acceptance, but genuine enthusiasm for what came next. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Mom told me about her conversation with you. I'm proud of you for standing up for yourself. Maggie typed back, Thank you, sweetheart. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept less than you deserve. I'm learning that from watching you. Good. That's exactly what I hoped you'd learn. Outside her window, Maggie could see her neighbor Brad working in his garden. On impulse, she walked outside. Brad, do you have a minute? He looked up from his roses, his face brightening when he saw her. Of course. How are you doing? You look different somehow. I feel different. I wanted to tell you that I'm selling my house. Brad's expression shifted to one of concern. Are you all right? Is everything okay with your family? Everything's fine. Better than fine, actually. I'm just ready for a change. Wow, that's a big decision. Where will you go? I don't know yet. That's the exciting part. Brad smiled, and Maggie was struck again by how genuine his expressions were, how different they felt from the careful social masks her family wore. You know, he said, I've been thinking about making some changes myself. Maybe it's something in the Florida air. What kind of changes? Nothing as dramatic as yours, but I've been feeling like I've been playing it too safe since my wife died. Living too quietly, taking too few risks. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people contemplating the possibility of transformation. Maggie? Brad said finally. Yes. Would you like to have dinner sometime before you leave? I'd like to hear about your plans, and maybe talk about mine. Maggie felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in decades. The thrill of possibility, of connection with someone who saw her as she was rather than as a collection of roles and obligations. I'd like that very much, she said. As she walked back to her house, Maggie realized that the storm she'd been anticipating wasn't something to be weathered. It was something to be embraced, something that would wash away everything that no longer served her and leave space for whatever came next. The final confrontation was over. Now came the real adventure. Now final confrontation was over. Now came the real adventure. But first, Maggie had to navigate the complex aftermath of decisions that would reshape not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. The paperwork arrived by courier the next morning. Thick packets of legal documents that would transfer ownership of her house to Sunshine Development Group within 10 days. Maggie signed each page with steady hands, feeling a mixture of liberation and vertigo with each stroke of her pen. By noon, it was done. Her house, her sanctuary for 8 years, would soon belong to someone else. She was sealing the documents in the prepaid envelope when her phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen. "Grandma, Dad told me about the house. Is it really happening?" "It's really happening, sweetheart. How do you feel?" Maggie considered the question seriously. Terrified and exhilarated in equal measure, like I'm about to jump off a cliff but I've finally grown wings. That's beautiful. And kind of terrifying. The best adventures usually are. Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Grandma, can I ask you something that might sound selfish?" "You can ask me anything." "Are you going to disappear from my life?" "I know you say you won't, but what if you move far away and get a new life and don't need us anymore?" The vulnerability in Sarah's voice nearly broke Maggie's heart. "Oh, sweetheart, listen to me very carefully. You are not something I need. You are someone I love. You are not an obligation or a burden or a tie that binds me to a life I don't want. You are a gift, a joy, a person I'm proud to know and honored to love. But if you're far away, distance doesn't diminish love, baby. If anything, having the freedom to choose to be in your life makes my presence more meaningful, not less. When I spend time with you now, it won't be because I have nowhere else to go or because I'm expected to show up. It'll be because you're exactly where I want to be." I never thought about it that way. Most people don't. They think family relationships are about proximity and obligation. But the strongest relationships are built on choice and genuine affection. So where will you go? What will you do? I don't know yet. That's the exciting part. For the first time in my adult life, I get to decide what comes next, based purely on what would make me happy. That sounds amazing. And scary. It is both. But I'd rather be scared and alive than safe and slowly disappearing. After hanging up with Sarah, Maggie found herself walking through her house with new eyes. Tomorrow, she would start the process of sorting through 8 years of accumulated belongings, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to discard. But today, she simply wanted to acknowledge what this place had meant to her. This house had been her refuge after Kyle left for college, her sanctuary after Harold's death, her proof that she could build a life on her own terms. Every room held memories of small victories and quiet contentments. But it also held the weight of loneliness. Of phone calls that didn't come. Of holidays spent hoping for invitations that arrived late or not at all. The house had served its purpose. Now it was time for something new. Her contemplation was interrupted by a knock at the door. She opened it to find Kyle standing on her porch, looking uncertain and younger than his years. "I brought lunch," he said, holding up a bag from the deli she'd mentioned liking months ago. "I thought maybe we could talk, really talk, without any agenda except getting to know each other." Maggie smiled, recognizing this as the first genuine gesture Kyle had made in longer than she could remember. "I'd like that." They spread the food on her kitchen table, turkey sandwiches, pasta salad, and the chocolate chip cookies she'd always been partial to. For the first few minutes they ate in silence, both seeming to search for a way to begin a conversation that had no predetermined outcome. "I've been thinking about what you said," Kyle finally ventured, "about not knowing who I am anymore. And I think it started in law school. The pressure to perform, to be the smartest person in the room, to never show uncertainty or weakness. I got really good at being whoever people needed me to be. That must be exhausting." "It is. I'm tired all the time, but not physically tired. Emotionally tired. Tired of pretending to have opinions I don't really hold. Tired of making conversation about things I don't actually care about. Tired of being successful at a life that doesn't feel like mine." Maggie set down her sandwich, giving Kyle her full attention. This was the most honest thing she'd heard from him in years. "What would feel like yours?" "I don't know. That's what scares me. I've been performing for so long that I'm not sure there's anything authentic left underneath." "There is. I saw glimpses of him yesterday, and I'm seeing him now." How can you be sure? Because the person who's sitting here questioning his choices, admitting his fears, searching for meaning, that's not a performance. That's courage. Kyle's eyes filled with tears. I've missed you, Mom. Not just having you around, but actually knowing you. I realized yesterday that I don't even know who you are anymore. Your real thoughts, your dreams. What makes you laugh? Would you like to know? Yes, very much. So Maggie told him about her water aerobics class, where she'd become friends with a group of women who called themselves the Splashers and met for coffee after every session. About her terrible watercolor paintings that she displayed proudly on her refrigerator because they represented joy rather than skill. About the romance novels she'd started reading after years of thinking they were beneath her, and how she discovered they were actually quite wonderful. She told him about her volunteer work at the library, helping seniors navigate computers and feeling useful in a way she hadn't since he was young. About her small garden victories and her larger garden failures. About the nights she danced in her kitchen to old songs that reminded her of Harold, and how those moments felt like celebration rather than grief. Kyle listened with an attention she hadn't experienced from him since he was a teenager, asking questions that showed genuine curiosity about her inner life. When she finished, he shook his head in amazement. Nee, mother. You have this whole rich life that I know nothing about. How did I miss all of this? You were looking at me as a mother instead of as a person. It's easy to do with people you love. You reduce them to their relationship to you instead of seeing them as complete human beings. I want to do better. I want to know all of this about you. I want to be someone you choose to spend time with, not someone you feel obligated to tolerate. Then start by being honest about who you are, not just who you think I want you to be. I'm scared, Kyle admitted. I'm scared that if I stop performing, people will see that there's nothing interesting underneath. I'm scared that Emma married the performance, not the person. I'm scared that I've built a life around being impressive instead of being genuine, and I don't know how to change that. Those are valid fears. What are you going to do with them? I don't know. Maybe start by being honest with the people who matter most. Maybe risk being unimpressive if it means being real. That sounds like a good beginning. They talked for 3 hours, sharing stories and perspectives that felt like excavating buried treasure. Kyle told her about cases that had troubled him ethically, but that he'd taken for financial reasons. About his fear that he was raising Sarah to value achievement over character. About his growing sense that he'd traded authenticity for security and wasn't sure how to find his way back. Maggie told him about the loneliness she'd felt even before Harold died. About dreams she'd deferred and then forgotten. About the slow process of rebuilding herself after his death, and how selling the house felt like the final step in that journey. When Kyle finally left, he hugged her with an intensity that reminded her of his childhood embraces, full body, wholehearted, real. Mom, I know you've made your decision about the house, and I respect that. But I want you to know that whether you're across town or across the country, I want to be part of your life. Not as an obligation, but as a choice we both make. I'd like that very much. And maybe you could help me figure out how to be a better man, how to be someone worth choosing. Kyle, you're already worth choosing, you just need to start believing it yourself. That evening, Maggie called Janet to confirm that all the paperwork had been submitted correctly. Everything's moving smoothly, Janet assured her. Closing is scheduled for next Friday. David Chen mentioned they're also looking at some other properties in the area. Apparently, business is booming. Other properties? Yes, he said they're particularly interested in that Lake Mary development where your son lives. Beautiful homes, but many of them could benefit from updating. They're hoping to approach some homeowners in that area soon. Maggie felt a flutter of something, not quite guilt, but awareness of possibilities and their implications. Interesting, she said carefully. Are you having second thoughts? It's not too late to change your mind. No second thoughts. I'm ready for whatever comes next. As she prepared for bed in her soon-to-be former house, Maggie reflected on the day's revelations. Kyle's vulnerability had shown her glimpses of the son she'd raised and lost, while his honesty about his fears had revealed the man he might become with courage and commitment. But regardless of Kyle's journey, her own path was clear. In 6 days, she would no longer own this house. In some number of days after that, she would begin a new chapter of her life, one written entirely by her own choices. The aftermath of her decision was proving to be more complex than she'd anticipated, but also more hopeful. Change was rippling outward, affecting not just her but everyone in her orbit. Some of those changes would be difficult, others might be beautiful. Yaftermatable Iwo. All of them would be honest. And after years of polite accommodations and careful compromises, honesty felt like exactly what her family needed. All of them would be honest. And after years of polite accommodations and careful compromises, honesty felt like exactly what her family needed. The morning of the closing arrived gray and humid, with the kind of oppressive Florida heat that made everything feel weighted with possibility. Maggie woke early in her mostly empty house, surrounded by boxes labeled for storage, donation, and the small pile of belongings she decided to keep. The past week had been a whirlwind of sorting and packing, each decision about what to keep or discard feeling symbolic of larger choices about who she wanted to be going forward. Harold's tools went to charity. She'd kept them for 8 years, but never used them, honoring memory more than practicality. The china they'd received as wedding gifts found a new home with Sarah, who'd asked for it with tears in her eyes. The photo albums stayed with Maggie, but the furniture that had simply filled space would fill someone else's space now. At 9 o'clock, she drove to Janet's office for the final paperwork. David Chen was already there, professional and smiling, but Maggie detected something else in his expression. A kind of excited energy that suggested today's transaction was part of something larger. "Mrs. Harper, I have to say, this has been one of the smoothest closings I've handled," David said as they signed the final documents. "Your house is exactly the kind of property we love to work with." "What are your plans for it?" Maggie asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "Complete renovation. We'll maintain the character of the neighborhood while updating everything for modern living. It'll be beautiful when we're finished." Maggie nodded, trying to feel enthusiastic about her home's transformation rather than melancholy about its erasure. "Actually," David continued, consulting his tablet, "we're hoping to take on several properties in Central Florida over the next few months. The market is so strong right now, and there are some beautiful neighborhoods that could benefit from thoughtful development." "Such as?" "Well, we're particularly interested in the Lake Mary area. Gorgeous homes, excellent schools, but many of the properties are 20 to 30 years old and could use updating. We're planning to reach out to homeowners there soon to see if anyone might be interested in selling." Maggie's pen paused over the signature line. "Lake Mary?" "Yes, it's a wonderful community. Do you know it?" "My son lives there." "Really? Small world. What's his address? We might be contacting him soon." Maggie felt the weight of possibility and consequence, settling around her like a storm system. She could give David Kyle's address, could set in motion the same kind of life-changing opportunity she'd just embraced. Or she could say nothing, let whatever happened happen without her direct involvement. "He lives on Meadowbrook Lane," she heard herself say. "Number 42 Meadowbrook Lane." David made a note on his tablet. "Perfect. We'll add that to our list of potential contacts." As they finished the paperwork and shook hands, Maggie felt the surreal nature of the moment. She'd just sold her house to a company that would soon be reaching out to her son about his. The symmetry was almost poetic. "Congratulations on your new adventure," David said as they parted ways. "I hope whatever comes next brings you great happiness." "Thank you," Maggie replied, and meant it. She drove home, to what was no longer home, to find Kyle's car in her driveway. He was sitting on her front porch, looking lost and young despite his expensive clothes and graying temples. "I wanted to be here when you got back," he said, standing as she approached. "How did it feel, signing the papers?" "Like jumping off a cliff," Maggie said honestly. "Terrifying and liberating in equal measure." "Are you having any regrets?" Maggie considered the question seriously. "No regrets. Some sadness, maybe, but not regrets. This house served its purpose in my life. Now it gets to serve a different purpose for someone else." They went inside together, their footsteps echoing strangely in the mostly empty rooms. Kyle looked around at the packed boxes and bare walls with an expression of wonder. "It's really happening, you're really leaving." "I am." "Where will you go first?" Maggie smiled. "I've been thinking about that. Remember how you used to ask me about places I'd never been but wanted to see? You always said you'd travel someday, when you had time. Well, now I have time. I'm thinking about starting with the Pacific Northwest. I've always wanted to see the redwoods, the Oregon coast. Maybe rent a cabin somewhere and just be. Figure out what comes next." "That sounds wonderful. And lonely." "Maybe, but there's a difference between being alone and being lonely. I've been lonely in rooms full of people who were supposed to love me. I might not be lonely at all on my own." Kyle was quiet for a moment, processing this. "Mom? Can I ask you something?" "Of course. When you were raising me, after Dad died, were you lonely then?" The question caught Maggie off guard with its directness and empathy. "Sometimes, but I was also purposeful. Everything I did mattered, because it mattered to you. I had a reason to get up every morning, a reason to work hard, a reason to hope for the future. And later? After I left for college? Later was harder. I had to learn how to matter to myself instead of just mattering to other people. Did you learn that? I'm still learning it. Selling this house is part of that learning." Kyle nodded slowly. "I think I need to learn that too. How to matter to myself." "You will, but it takes practice, and it takes courage to disappoint people who expect you to be someone you're not." "Like Emma? Like anyone who loves their idea of you more than they love the real you." They spent the afternoon together, Kyle helping Maggie load the last boxes into her car and the small storage unit she'd rented across town. It felt like a reversal of 18 years ago when she'd helped him pack for college, but with a different energy. Less like an ending and more like a beginning. As they worked, Kyle talked about his plans to have more honest conversations with Emma, about their marriage, about his work, about the kind of man he wanted to be. He talked about wanting to build a genuine relationship with Sarah, instead of just providing for her. He talked about his fears and his hopes with the kind of openness that reminded Maggie of the little boy who used to tell her his dreams and theories about the world. "You know what's strange?" Kyle said as they loaded the last box. "For the first time in years, I'm excited about the future, instead of just trying to manage it." "That's not strange at all. That's what happens when you start living authentically." As the sun began to set, they stood in Maggie's empty living room one last time. The space felt bigger without furniture, but also somehow more intimate. Just a mother and son saying goodbye to one chapter of their story while beginning to write another. "I'm proud of you," Kyle said suddenly, "for having the courage to change your life when it wasn't working anymore, for refusing to settle for less than you deserve, for teaching me that it's never too late to choose authenticity over convenience. I'm proud of you too. For being willing to question yourself, to admit when you're lost, to ask for help finding your way back to who you really are." Kyle hugged her then, and for the first time in years, it felt like a beginning rather than an ending. "Where will you stay tonight?" he asked. "You can't stay in a hotel. Come stay with us." Maggie smiled at the invitation, recognizing both its sincerity and its impossibility. "Thank you, sweetheart, but I already have plans." "Plans?" "Brad, my neighbor, invited me to dinner. We're going to talk about new beginnings and second chances." Kyle's eyebrows rose. "Brad? The man with the roses?" "The man with the roses and the kind smile and the understanding that sometimes you have to leave everything familiar to find out who you really are." Is this? I don't know what this is. That's what makes it exciting." As Kyle drove away, Maggie stood in her empty house one last time, feeling the weight and lightness of complete transformation. Tomorrow, the house would be someone else's project, someone else's potential. Tomorrow, she would begin a journey that had no predetermined destination except her own happiness. Her phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Grandma, I'm so proud of you for choosing yourself. You're teaching me that women can be brave at any age." Maggie typed back, We can, baby, we absolutely can. Another text arrived, this one from Brad. Looking forward to dinner and whatever conversations come with it. Here's to new beginnings. As she walked out of her house for the last time, locking the door behind her, Maggie felt something she hadn't experienced in decades. The thrilling uncertainty of a life with infinite possibilities. She'd spent so many years living within the boundaries of other people's expectations that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be completely free to choose her own path. At 68, Margaret Harper was finally ready to discover who she could become when nobody else's needs came before her own. The garage was behind her. The whole world lay ahead. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, that felt like exactly where she was meant to be. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.